probably some of you remember, this is an update, refresh of a thing I did about 5 years ago, 6 years ago.
5 years ago, I wouldn't remember.
So anyway, but it's a topic that I enjoy.
So history hasn't changed.
this especially. So anyway, so it's good to see you for the first of a 3-week series that I call Before and After King James, a history of the Bible in English. So history of all the different versions of the Bible in English from the beginning of time. And so let's see, just I like this graphic I found online, a lively picture describing the weight and substance of God's most blessed word against the doctrines and vanities of man's traditions. So, all right.
Goodness.
What's happening? Serious people.
What is
And that this is from a famous book, 1583 edition of John Fox's Book of Martyrs, which was, I don't know if any of you have heard of it, but it's a horrible book, repeatedly updated and brought out in England in the 16th century, documenting all of the religious strife going on between Catholics, Church of England, and who killed who, how, and whose bones they dug up and ground up and threw in the ocean. I mean, it's horrible, horrible stuff. But such is the impact of our beloved Bible. So this week we'll talk about just kind of a review of the earliest stuff about the origin of the Bible as we know it, sort of from ancient to medieval times, and then after that. And then, of course, we'll look at the first translations of the Bible into English, quite a few of them. And we'll get to the earliest Bibles after the invention of printing in the 1450s. And then next week, we'll have a lot more Bibles from the 1500s, kind of show and tell kind of fashion, and talk a little bit about Bibles in other languages and the publication of the all-important King James Version, King James Bible of 1611. Third week, we'll continue talking about King James, and then essentially the 400 years since King James, because as you know, there are a gazillion other modern versions of the Bible in English. So certainly the Bible is a book that's been translated, revised, updated, probably more than any other book in history. I mean, it's hard to imagine a comparable situation with any other text. So first of all, let's review before there was English, right? Because our language is pretty new. It hasn't been around that long. So reviewing the Bible before English, remember that the earliest transmission of biblical texts and the languages that were used, those original languages, the oldest, of course, the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, in Hebrew, Jesus spoke Aramaic. So everything from Jesus's mouth is probably Aramaic to Greek and or Latin, and so so on. So we've got about 2,000 years in terms of the Bible that are copies of copies of copies of texts produced by hand, because that's all we could do until the invention of printing, famously in the 1450s, and we'll of course talk about that a little bit. But pardon?
The Guggenheim.
Gutenberg, yeah. Sure. Basically, and I didn't realize this for a long time, today we really have no original biblical documents from Jesus' lifetime or earlier. None.
What would that be?
Pardon?
You said an original.
Like an original piece of papyrus or parchment or something.
written, like the Gospels?
Right.
I thought, oh, where do they come from?
Well, they're copies of copies of copies of copies.
Oh,
So all we got is copies.
Yeah, fortunately, we have a lot of copies and a lot of good copies, but copies nonetheless. But as far as a piece of papyrus, a piece of vellum, paper didn't really exist yet. An original one from the year one, we don't have that old. And this was kind of cool. This is a real life thing that I held in my very hands. This is an example of a biblical text on the right, manuscript on vellum from a Bavarian monastery around the year 700 AD that is on loan currently to the Ohio State Rare Books Library. And so I went over and, there was kind of a invent and stuff.
They let you actually touch it.
Yeah. But I mean,
Catch your fingerprint on the left.
under very, yeah, that is actually a picture with, I mean, I was very careful. I didn't sneeze or anything. But this is basically the oldest we have of any sort of original text of the biblical tradition.
What language is that?
Latin.
Just curious.
Good question.
Latin.
Yeah, like 2 years.
And it's on vellum, the stretched calf skin, which was the way that they got the best writing surface in the Middle Ages was by skinning calves and, treating the hides, and then they could write on them. So also this should be kind of review and probably familiar to most of us. The Roman Catholic Church is then the spiritual leader for most of Christianity and most of Europe for over 1,000 years, roughly say the 400s to 1400s AD. Our Bible, the books of the Bible in the order that they're in, that has fluctuated over time. I mean, a lot. Well, not a lot, but a fair amount. But our version with the list of books in the order is roughly from the 300s AD forward. So, 300 years after Jesus, we kind of settled on the Bible like we have it now. Latin, of course, was the language of the Roman Empire, therefore the early church centered in Rome, and the language of education and the state. I mean, in European Middle Ages, if you're educated in Latin. And then St. Jerome's translation of the Bible into Latin, sort of a new version based on all the text he could get his hands on, was from around 400 AD. And Jerome's Bible was the definitive version for, about 1,000 years. Not bad. I mean, that's, to do the version of the Bible that lasts for 1,000 years. And it's typically called the Vulgate. And I always, caution people, it doesn't mean it's like vulgar or anything like that. It's just, the root just means it's kind of common language for everybody, for the people or whatever. So then gradually we have in Europe the development of vernaculars, meaning the languages that we actually speak. So here we get to things like the development of English, German, French. And of course, all of those languages have long and complex histories as well. So what we're then going to look at as we get ourselves to sort of closer time in period, we'll look at how, when, and why the Bible was translated into English, which will involve various stages of English. So Old English, so pre 1066, is that a term to everyone? 1066, Middle English then up until maybe the year 1500, early modern English, think Shakespeare, and then modern English. And so as you know, there's these various versions of English that are, harder harder to read and understand the farther back you go.
David,
Yeah.
it's interesting that in Islam, where Muhammad wrote down the Quran,
Right.
how quickly it spread, like wildfire within 30, 40 years. It was all, and it took 400 years for Christianity. And maybe it has something to do with what you were saying about writing it because there was no Ur text from the beginning.
Exactly.
It took that long to distill it into a commonly acceptable format.
Right.
It's very interesting.
Yeah. Well, and so everyone here, this notion that Muhammad, with the Quran, that was a text that was produced very quickly. And basically the reason is Muhammad basically was inspired by God and was taking dictation. The Quran is just dictated by Muhammad, like in a cave for 4 years. I mean, it was something like that. And so he came out with this explosive text after 4 years. And oh my gosh, all this. And by the way, keep in mind, the Quran, the vision of Allah as articulated in the Quran, is in the Judeo-Christian tradition. It's the same God. Jesus is mentioned a lot, Jesus and Mary, in the Quran, not viewed as divine, but still as great prophets and such. So, so I mean, that's another interesting thing about sort of the history of religion, the history of language carrying them, and how our sacred books originate, which in our case is with great difficulty anthologized from many sources over centuries versus 4 years in a cave.
But was he writing in the common language of that time?
Yeah, Arabic. Yeah. I mean,
Okay.
as far as I know, I don't
I
think it.
think we got stuck with the Catholic Church and going to Latin. And nobody could read or read. You'll speak.
Well, some people could.
Well, only those in the church.
Yeah, well, right. Yeah. But thank God for the Roman Catholic Church, because we wouldn't have this church or probably any other without it. I mean, this was 1,000 years that kind of kept things going.
Whereas Arabic is still a modern language.
Right.
Arabic is still a modern language.
Right,
So
and
that's a difference.
And I don't know how distant Muhammad's Arabic of the Quran is from, and even as I understand it, modern Arabic spread, North Africa, Middle East, Southeast Asia. I think there's a lot of dialects and a lot of variation even in
I have a friend
Arabic.
who's from Syria, and they speak Arabic.
Yep.
So I'll ask her that one.
There's Shia, Sunni
Yeah.
thing, and lots of history there too. Actually,
I have a question about St. What documents did he use? Were they Greek?
I don't have a good detailed answer, but I think he used Hebrew for the Old Testament and Greek for the New Testament.
Could you repeat the question, David?
Sure. Sort of what texts and what languages did Jerome use in creating the Vulgate? And I think it's
I don't want to be tangential, but I just need to mention that the Gutenberg printing press made such a difference in the way you communicate, because you could then literally mass produce.
yes.
And that also, in the art world, in illustration, they came up with flip block printmaking. So now the monks and people weren't hand doing for years and years and years.
Exactly.
All these beautiful, and a lot of them with gold illustrations. And then take that forward now. We talked about this even at the elementary level in school.
Mhm.
The digital age, 4 years in the Quran, think about how ideologies and just anything now is transferred within minutes.
Right. It is. Yeah. It is. It's kind of mind blowing. We're in utterly, totally a different reality, I guess you could say.
Sure.
Yeah.
Would the repression of the Christian church by the Roman Empire have delayed some of this?
Definitely, yeah.
When did the Romans quit? When was the Roman Empire accept Christianity?
I think the Roman Empire had a few bad centuries, like 200s, 300s, whatever. It's interesting that like Saint Jerome doing the Bible around 400 AD. I think that's at a point where the Roman Empire is kind of, well, it's kind of on its way. I mean, probably there's, rebellions in different regions, and just it's no longer the strong, totalitarian state that it was, like in Jesus's time, and for quite a while after. So, and that would certainly have delayed. You kind of wonder, it's impossible to know, but would Jesus's message have succeeded and spread more quickly if the Roman Empire had not been there, or and getting in the way, or oppressing, killing Christians, or whatever? I think the answer, frankly, is no, because one thing about the Roman Empire is they knew how to build ships and roads all over the place. So, I mean, they might not like you, but you can get around, and like Paul traveling around and stuff. So, lots of interesting stuff, and we're really not even to English yet. So, let's see. So this is kind of jumping ahead. The sort of King James. That's what the Bible has come to be called. Essentially sponsored by King James, produced in 1611. Really our centerpiece and point of reference, not only for my series, but almost really the history of Christianity, the history of the Bible in Christianity. The King James Version sort of looms in a very key, central, profound place. Probably the best known Bible in English, probably the best known Bible in any language at all. You'll also hear KJV, King James Version, it's pretty self-explanatory. Interestingly, you might think, well, King James was the first Bible in English. It was not. There are many English translations of the Bible before, and that's what we're going to spend most of our time on, is the earliest English Bibles up to King James, and then we'll also talk, like in week 3, about Bibles after King James. So, like Luther's German Reformation, this Bible is tied directly and profoundly to the history of book printing, like we were already mentioning, sort of starting in Germany in the 1450s. So, talk just a little bit about English and what we're, because really even to use the term English is not always a simple thing. We need to start by talking a little bit about Old English. Linguistically, English is construed as a Germanic language, and that's kind of a linguistic category. There's certain criteria by which scholars label certain things. But as far as the history of who was speaking what, when, and where, and who was in contact with other people, and you're trying to communicate, well, in the British Isles, here's kind of a nice schematic from around the year 1000 AD. I mean, the schematic is modern, but the situation is around 1000 AD. We think of Old English dating roughly from the years 600 to 1100 AD. Pretty limited number of texts survive. I mean, I think if you put together every bit of Old English that exists that we have, in the world that we know about, it would probably fit like on these shelves right here. And which actually is quite a bit. I mean, there's a lot of really good things like Beowulf and stuff. But a limited number exist, and you can see how even the idea of English in England is tricky in the early centuries. We have essentially Old English in most of what we recognize as England proper. But there's Vikings coming and attacking and settling in certain areas. There's other cultural traditions and populations around, so that in the British Isles, along with English, we still have Welsh in Wales, which is utterly different. I mean, just a different language. Cumbric, which I don't really know much about at all. Old Cornish. So there were tribes of people with their own languages, and the English were enough bullies or successful or both that they essentially occupied the whole island through the course of the Middle Ages. We've got Irish existing in what is today Scotland. Other languages that are scarcely known but existed: Pictish, Norman ? So it's very hard to know because there's really hardly any documentation of who spoke what, where, and when for some of those outlier areas. There's no complete Bible, but parts of it were translated into Old English, for example, for sermons. So we do have some biblical text, like the Lord's Prayer and some things like that in Old English. Allegedly, in the 700s, 8th century, Bede, the Venerable Bede, scholar of England, translated the Gospel of John into Old English. We know of it because it's mentioned, but we don't have a copy. No one's found a copy of that. So that might be viewed as that's the earliest bit of the Bible in English, would be in the 8th century, if only we actually had it, which we don't. So in the late 9th century, King Alfred the Great, I guess being king, he still had enough time to translate and stuff, which, that's cool. Translated Psalms and 4 Gospels. And so repeat after me, we'll practice a little bit of English. Okay.
Where's your little pen?
Yeah, I need my little pointy thing.
Your light
Please don't make us do this.
Vader Ure, du beart on heavenum, si thin nama gehalgot, tobecuma thin richa, gewerta thin willa, on earthan, swa on heavenum.
Is that heaven, that last word?
It is. Well, it's plural. Plural. It's the heavens. But
That's the only word I recognize.
exactly. Well, what's that?
Father.
Our, you who are in the heavens, be thy name hallowed. Let come
To become.
thy, your, think Third Reich, kingdom, Richa, and then become thy will on earth. That's pretty recognizable, just as in the heavens. So anyway, so that's kind of our brilliant. And so, again, at the risk of covering stuff that you're already aware of, but I think it's good to keep in mind, there's a dramatic change in English from Old English to what comes next. after the Norman conquest of 1066 AD, which resulted in a massive influx of the French, and therefore a bunch of French and kind of Latin-based words. So just read any paragraph, any sentence, and there's a whole bunch of words that are ultimately this French influence that was so profound. I mean, people in contact share languages, and people of different languages, impact each other's language. It's just, that's how language works. So in this period, miscellaneous Bible selections are translated and adapted into then Middle English in the 13th century. And in fact, by 1484, there's known 18 early partial English translations. So biblical texts, that are datable and documented. And there's actually 107 complete Bibles. Then, if you take from the 1380s to today, so it's a whole lot. And again, King James would loom large, in that number. Of course, most of those 107, we'll never know anything about it all. So, okay, so now we get to the 14th century Wycliffe's Bible. This is our English Bible number 1. This is where we start our look at the sequence of Bibles in English. So this is a Bible translation into Middle English, completed basically under the direction of the theologian and reformer John Wycliffe. And being a reformer, that's not good for your life insurance policies, put it that way. He was not happy about the Catholic Church in different ways, and he was part of a movement called the Lollard movement. Like, think about Martin Luther's disruption and Reformation, kind of a similar phenomenon. Unhappiness with what is going on in the Catholic Church, and so some people of good faith are trying to do something about it, rejecting many Catholic teachings. So Wycliffe's Bible was based on the Latin Vulgate, which we talked about, and was popular. There are portions of more than 250 hand-copied manuscripts surviving. So this is before book printing as such. So this is, people are copying this English version of the Bible that came from John Wycliffe. Suppressed by the English king and the Catholic Church, they weren't happy at all. This is kind of cool because we can read it just a little. Jerome saith thus, in the, see the little V thing? That's like the. In the beginning was the Word, and, little symbol, the Word was at God, and God was the Word. This was in the beginning at God. All things were made by Him. And so pretty cool. I mean, we can kind of, read it. And, so our focus now, again, this is handwritten translation. So I mean, you've really got to be committed to the Bible to be, making copies by hand. But I mean, that was how those came about. Our focus is then going to jump ahead to the we're actually most of the way through our first section. So I guess our focus, we're already in our focus, but from here on out, put it that way, we will be looking at the history of Bibles as printed books. And in fact, and I think you're probably most or all aware of this, in the 1450s, Johannes Gutenberg invented printing. And what that means, and just a little refresher, here is a printing press of Gutenberg's type. You need paper and ink and reusable little letters, right, that you stick together and make a text. And then you put all those little letters on a page, you put ink on, and then, inspired by the tradition of winemaking, wine press, pull down and put pressure. And so you put your paper in there, your metal letters, ink, and you print a whole page. So, kind of a miracle, a whole page instead of writing it all. That occurred in Germany in the 1450s. The first printed book was, surprise, surprise, St. Jerome's Vulgate, sort of the most important Bible, in history, definitive for the church for, 1,000 years. The Vulgate is 1,000 years old, and the first printed book. So, yeah.
How long did they use that kind of a printing press? Is that what we used until we got into the digital age?
Yeah, well, and there's still some of those around. They're a lot better and a lot faster, but sure.
Ohio University has an amazing print shop that uses these little letters.
Yeah.
And they have many presses that kind of chronicle the history of the press, and they actually use it to produce stuff that
Yeah.
we see today.
Exactly.
It must take forever.
Well, you get really good at it. Because that must have been a heck of a job, right? Because you have like a little stick and you're upside down and backwards and W's.
Right, because everything has to be reversed.
Yes, yeah. Because you work for like half a day and you got a page. Right? And then ink, paper, do it just right, or you throw that one away and try again. Or, oh crap, you made a mistake and you have to undo part of it. Yeah. But compared to, the thing is, once you've got that page, yeah, and the most expensive part, what do you think was the most expensive part of printing? Paper, ink, the letters, or labor? Which in the early days, what do you think was the most expensive? Paper, yeah. Paper was the most expensive because having good paper was crucial, and good paper is made by a long and difficult process if you don't do it right, it's not good and stuff. Yeah, labor is nothing. Labor is dirt cheap. Work for $1 a day and be glad labor is not a problem. It's the paper. So now we're in our exploration of Bibles. We'll be considering the 1500s to 1700s in England, in the shadow of Martin Luther, that launched the Reformation in 1517, which, like we're talking about, included his speedy production of a Bible in German. That's a whole other story in its own right, but essentially that's a key moment for our history as a church as well. We'll see in our exploration, there's sort of different sources for the English Bibles. Of course, there sort of most profoundly would be Hebrew, Greek, and or Latin texts being translated into English. Essentially English into English. Old English to modern, Middle English to modern, or even, making things sound better. And then other sources for English Bibles, very importantly, would be Luther's German. It was hugely important across Europe as well. So that's sort of where our where the language resources that will go into our English Bibles. So this is just kind of a little kind of a interesting sideline little data point on the dates of earliest printed Bibles in the various European vernacular languages. Okay, so this is after the printing. The Gutenberg Bible, 1450s. Okay, well, so, and remember, Gutenberg is Latin. So, the first printed Bible in German was published by a printer called Mentelin in the city of Strasbourg in 1466. So not long after the, quote, invention of printing itself. And Strasbourg is, just up the river from Mainz where Gutenberg's working. So, I mean, the word gets around or whatever. And in fact, that 1466 German Bible is the first printed Bible in any modern language. Okay, so we had the Latin, and there's that. But the printing press and this movement to translate Bibles, those went kind of hand in hand, because consider that Gutenberg's technology clearly was stolen and imitated right away. I mean, the secret was out. I mean, so any getting a patent or no, because by 1471, so like 15 years after Gutenberg, in Italy, you've got a printer in Venice producing a Bible in Italian. French, Lyon, 1473 to 78 was what I read. Let's see, Dutch in Delft, apparently 1477 for the Old Testament, and then a whole Bible by 1526. And even Czech Bible, Jan Hus, the troublemaking reformer in sort of what we think of as Czechoslovakia, Czech Republic. New Testament in 1475, and a whole Bible by 1488. Spanish in Basel, Switzerland, 1569. So it's much later, for whatever reason. And then English is Coverdale in Antwerp in 1535. So there we have some early dates of vernacular Bibles, and we get a vivid view of how important the Gutenberg printing revolution really was. So let's go now to our, this is English Bible number 2. This is William Tyndale. He was kind of a controversial father of the English Bible. The first English New Testament in print. He wanted to do the Old Testament as well, but I mean, he didn't get it. The Old Testament is far too long. And, all that Jesus stuff. That's our favorite. Anyway, Tyndale translated Erasmus's 1516 Greek New Testament into English, published in Germany, 1526. It's clearly under the influence of Martin Luther's 1520s German New Testament as well. So it's a busy time of translating and printing Bibles in the early 1500s. Tyndale's book probably had a print run of around 3,000, question mark, we don't know. Maybe up to 50,000 copies by 1530. It was really hot stuff. But here's the thing, it was banned, it was outlawed, it was criminal to possess this book. They were confiscated, burned in England. People were jailed for having them, things like that. And so, well, the church had a tradition of calling all the shots and controlling the text, controlling the narrative. So
They decided it was heresy for people to get it in their
And and this is not from, like 1526. This is not that. This is a facsimile reproduction of the Tyndale Bible, but it is a photographic reproduction of the 1526 text. So that's pretty cool. You notice something about this? What did it mean?
Little.
It's little.
It's thick. It's thick.
Well, it kind of has to be because the pages are so little. Yeah. Well, I think the sense on this is that you kind of wanted a book that was easy to move around, could put in a pocket or that kind of thing. Because it's
Or hide.
high. Yeah, exactly. Because as a matter of fact, see that number 50,000, these estimates?
Yeah.
Today, how many do you think are existing today?
5 billion.
5. That's it. I think the number is maybe like 3 or 4. I think there was one discovered a few years ago. But to think about how much that book was hated or suppressed. If there were 50,000 and only 5 today, wow, right? Let me.
I got a question. How many
Sure.
people could read back then? That's a big deal too, isn't it?
Yeah. I think the answer is more all the time, but still not a lot.
Would it be more the higher class people?
Yeah, probably yes.
The peons wouldn't.
Right. Because
That's what I've been thinking about. How many people even got to read?
But yeah, I mean, I think, but once book printing occurred, well, one thing, as soon as there was book printing, it meant there were lucrative jobs if you're literate, because you could do the thing assembling the pages and the printing jobs and stuff like that. So I think the literacy in pre-modern Europe is just a big, wide open, field where some things are known, some things are kind of conjecture.
I have to insert this at this point, David. I know you're going to inquire anything, but it's been 15 years ago. I'm trying to think in my own mind. One of my sons is a filmmaker, that he was asked by his church to go to Africa, to Ghana, to film this family that was helping this part of Africa community who had no written language. They were oral as people. That's the way news was spread.
Right.
Way back. And because they wanted to write the Bible in their heart language. And that the missionary and his young family was one of Joel's brothers, who at that time I didn't know nothing about. And it all kind of pieced together that they're coming at it from a totally opposite direction. They have to create the written language so they can make it art.
Yeah, exactly. Wow. Interesting. Yeah. And that's and that's a story that has occurred with a lot of sort of like endangered languages around the world, spoken by small groups of people. The idea that if they can have help in establishing a written language, and of course then establishing a written or literary tradition, that kind of thing.
I think it was continuing even though he's back.
Right, and I think the reality is that for a lot of these smaller languages with fewer speakers all the time, more of those are just vanishing than being saved. Frankly, I mean that's just more the reality. I think. Well, you figure, I mean, if there were 50,000 of these, and it can be, you can get down to where there's only 5. I mean, things it's easy to obliterate things, or seemingly, so, yeah, so, let me, pass it around, you can have a look, it's very kind of bare, simple text, there's not commentary, there's not prologue, it's just the New Testament, MDXXVI, what year is that?
26.
1526.
That's it.
Yeah, 1526. So, yeah, just flip around in that if you want a little bit. And that's our first show and tell. And let's see, a few more things while that's going around. We should say there was an influential second edition, 1534. Tyndale, for all whose trouble, was burned at the stake in 1536. And it's interesting because here in this Book of Martyrs, he's burned at the stake in 1536, but by the time or by the people publishing this book about the religious upheavals, notice what it's called, the martyrdom and burning of Master William Tyndale in Flanders. How attitudes and opinions of people change. Tyndale, despite its kind of small size, you think, gee, this little book, I mean, how much influence could it have had? Well, it was, in fact, an important source for the language in the King James Bible, such as, ask and it shall be given you, seek and ye shall find. So there's quite a few King James, kind of phrasing like that was Tyndale's translation. So I mean, he did a heck of a good translation. And in fact, I saw a statistic that I don't know how they measured but I thought it was worth kind of pointing out this idea that 83% of the 1611 King James Version New Testament derives from Tyndale. Because you figure when we get to King James, the way that was done was by consulting and using all of the other previous Bibles that were known and around. So for Tyndale, to occupy such a prominent role in the language, it was kind of noteworthy, I thought. So,
And notice who's in the picture watching.
pardon?
The soldiers and the church.
Oh yeah. Guys with spears, holy looking guy, and
Only in the front are a few civilians.
Yeah.
Scholars.
Lord, open the King of English eyes.
And that is a wood print.
Yes,
That's carved in wood.
Right.
Like that.
exactly.
Hey, David, when did the Church of England come in? So this is during the Catholic period, right?
Mm-hmm. And I
I think the Church of England come in and what?
16th,
Hopefully the eighth.
I think 16th century.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is being, his persecution was done by the Catholic Church, which is one
Yeah.
state.
Yeah. So and that's a whole big other history.
All because he wanted a divorce. I always laugh at that one.
Yeah, that's good.
So I'm confused a little. This guy's edition got burned and confiscated. How's come King James didn't? What happened between?
Because he was.
Oh well, King James was the king. You're not going to burn him and banish his.
Well, I'm not so sure the Catholic Church would have thought that.
Oh yeah. Well, the Catholics. The Catholics were not on board at all. But but the thing is, the thing with King James, we'll see, is that was a much grander project in terms of scope and scholars involved and kind of a whole team, experts and cross-checking with each other. I mean, it was a very impressive undertaking, you know, and they're right at the beginning of the 1600s. So yeah, as opposed to, you know, some guy translating the New Testament, you know, in his spare time and publishing it or whatever. So yeah, so that's it for today, and next week and the week after, we'll just pick up and continue from there. So thanks for coming, thanks for your attention.
Amazing. Thank you.